Hello, my name is Michael Tranchina. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the Convention of States Project, and I'm going to spend just a few minutes for the district captains in the training to discuss the Convention of States resolution. It's very important as a Convention of States supporter, and particularly as a district captain, that you are familiar with a resolution. It's very simple, but it's very powerful and profound, and we want to make sure that you are familiar with it. So the first thing we want to make sure is that you know where to find the resolution, and you need to go to cosaction.com. So when you go to our website, the first thing you're going to want to do is go to the volunteer section, go down to the Citizens Toolkit, scroll down, and you'll see the second item in the list is the state application. And when you click on this, you will open up a PDF, and that PDF will allow you to download and read the petition, the application. So let's go through the application. The application, as I said, is very simple. It's one page, and it's divided into two different primary sections. The first section is the preamble, and it really just lays out some ideas about why we are proposing this resolution. So it talks about the founders of the Constitution empowered the state legislators to be guardians of liberty against future abuses of power. Whereas the federal government has created a crushing national debt through improper and imprudent spending, whereas the federal government has invaded the legitimate roles of the states through the manipulative process of federal mandates, most of which are unfunded to a great extent, and whereas the federal government has ceased to live under a proper interpretation of the Constitution of the United States, and whereas it is the solemn duty of the states to protect the liberty of our people, particularly for the generations to come, by proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States through a convention of states under Article 5 for the purpose of restraining these and related powers, abuses of power. So that's the preamble, and that is not what we would call operative language. That is really just a preamble to the resolution. The second half of the COS resolution is what we would call the operative language. This is the actual language that is legal and relevant to the Article 5 convention that we're calling. The first section you will see there is it's be it resolved by the legislator of the state of. Now section 1 is the key section that outlines the call, if you will. And the call in this particular case, I've highlighted it here, is for calling of a convention of states limited, and that word limited is very important, to proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States. So this is a limited call, and this resolution is going to outline what the limits are. The first limit is to impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. So to impose fiscal restraints. In other words, the states want to make sure that we, the people in the states, have the ability to say stop spending, no more spending. As we all know, our federal government seems as though there are no limits to their spending. And you can imagine if you have an open checkbook and you are writing checks out of it using other people's money, it would become intoxicating. It would become easy to continue, and really I think if we're honest, the average person, if they were given a checkbook and told that they could write unlimited checks out of it and the money would just keep getting printed, most individuals would have a hard time restraining themselves, because why would they? There's no limit. And that's what we have here. So our resolution is calling for imposing fiscal restraints on our federal government. And we don't have specifics. This is to be discussed at the convention. The second limit that we're asking is to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. So we know the federal government seems to have almost unlimited power, and the jurisdiction is at the point where there's no limit. Now they can dictate pretty much anything they want to the states, completely contrary to the Constitution. And so the call is to call a Convention of States to discuss limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. And the third item on the proposed resolution is to limit the terms of office for its officials and for members of Congress. Now, what we mean by that is term limits for elected officials and the Supreme Court. So, and limit the terms of office for its officials. That the term for its officials means anyone in office in the federal government and for members of Congress. Many people are against term limits in Congress. That's fine. This is not specifically related to that. It's one option, but I think another very, very important area is the Supreme Court, and that's up for discussion at the convention. So there are three limiting topics that are to be discussed at a Convention of States, guided by our Constitution in Article 5. Section 2 is really administrative. It just instructs that the Secretary of the State is going to supply a copy of the application to the Senate and the Speaker and the Clerk of the United States House of Representatives. They're going to provide copies to the state, as well as copies to presiding officers at the legislative houses in several states, just to get the word out to other states. And Section 3 is really just a statement that this resolution constitutes a continuing application, meaning once a state legislature approves this resolution, it will remain in effect in accordance with Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States until legislatures of at least 2/3 of several states have made an application on the same subject, meaning they ratify or pass this resolution in 34 other states, at which point that would be 2/3 of the states, and that would then allow Congress would be forced to call the Convention of States. They would call it, and then the 50 states, not just the 34 that pass it, but all 50 states would then come together and have a Convention of States. And of course, between the time the 34 states approve the resolution and the actual call and convention is going to be some time, because the states have to identify the delegates that they're going to send and the rules that they're going to follow when they send those delegates to the convention. So that's it. That's the Convention of States Article 5 Convention Resolution, and I hope that was clear. And if you have any questions, you have an amazing amount of resources to inquire and get into more detail. Thanks a lot, and continue working through your training.